Since the first terrain deathmatch, Scott's no longer answering my calls, so today I'm having a deathmatch by myself. I have to build a thing in an hour. The build on the left is sci-fi and the build on the right is fantasy. The goal for the fantasy build is a crystally, earthy shape that floats in the air because of magic. But for the most part, with my hot wire cutting, I'm just going with the flow and praying something good will come out of it. I'm using a handheld hot wire cutter that runs on a rechargeable battery pack. No, I won't be doing a tutorial. I have no idea how electricity works. I just put parts together and in some sort of miracle it was fine and cut things and also didn't explode. For the sci-fi build, I'm going for some sort of hut or bootleg shop. The foundation of the shop is one of those hardware organizers. I saw a picture of the idea on a forum years ago and it was so cool. I spent lots of money and I bought a heap of them, and then they sort of just sat on my shelf most of the time, not even holding anything. I'm using two kinds of plastic here, EPVC, which is thick and easy to cut plastic, and recycled plastic from an old shopping bag, which I thought had an interesting texture. To make everything extra magical, I'm using an alcohol-based marker to draw on some runes. The alcohol melts the foam slightly, so I'm hoping with a bit of paint they'll stand out. Cutting wire isn't really a job for a knife, but that's why my go-to workhorse knife is a fixed blade utility knife. You can abuse it and use it an infinite number of ways you're not meant to, and then just swap out the blades inexpensively when you ruin them with mistreatment. I use a utility knife for basically everything I'd use a hobby knife for, and honestly, I rarely find a reason not to use it, even working with small models. The carpenter's square is my go-to ruler, replacing my steel rules. The extra height and beveled edges is much safer, as the blade is less likely to ride up the ruler and slice your finger in horrible ways, which has happened before when I got a bit overconfident and the result was pretty gnarly and scary. These superglue and bicarb soda workstations I made are possibly my favourite addition to my workspace. Superglue and bicarb soda make an instant plastic-like compound when mixed, perfect for speed building and bridging gaps. So it makes sense to have them side by side at all times, especially when you have those moments where you're gluing two parts together and you can feel it not holding and you're like, man, I wish I had some bicarb right now, but if I move, everything will fall apart, which sounds specific, but I feel like it happens all the time. Also, my favourite feature is the space on the side to hold my half-used tubes in the correct orientation so they don't get mixed in with the new ones or leak everywhere, which they have a tendency to do. I'm using superglue to glue on the flock. It's not a speed thing, it's just somehow I've managed to run out of PVA glue and not realised, even though for the past 3 months I've been scraping the very bottom of the bottle and saying I should really buy some more PVA glue before I run out. I pre-made this flock about 15 minutes before filming, so it's still slightly damp, but I found out recently, actually from my D&D skull build, that wet flock will soak up PVA glue on the base better than dry flock, and the whole thing will become rock hard, so you can build up large mounds of flock that way as well. Great for jungle terrain or making shrubs and stuff. On this sci-fi build, I'm cutting every piece by eye and just letting the superglue and bicarb cover any mistakes. Measuring things is always so boring, which is why I make templates for my projects instead. I love the look of adding supports all over the place. The rawness of structures gives it a very old Final Fantasy VII vibe, which is my favourite of all the vibes. The aesthetic is what I based my sci-fi Greeblies pack off, and I actually use one of the pieces from that kit in this build as well. I had no idea how I was going to paint this earth crystal thing. I sort of just slapped paint on until I found a colour that I thought sort of works, which is totally how I paint all my other projects, but this time, with the time restraint, it was a little bit more panicky. I've been thinking a lot about paint storage recently. Typically, I like to choose a colour by seeing all my options in front of me, because I think it leads to more experimental decisions. My issue is storing these big tube paints is really difficult, so if you have any ideas of paint storage, please let me know. In a way, this process sort of feels like I'm doing concept sketches, which I've never really been good at because I think I tend to overthink things a little bit. But the time limit forcing myself to make decisions quickly, whether they're the best decision or not, I think has led to some good design choices that I probably wouldn't normally go for. On top of the sci-fi build, I made an angle flappy piece to cover up the tray's feet, which ended up being my favourite part of the build. But if I didn't have the time restraint, I would have totally cut off and sanded those feet flat and probably approached the whole thing differently, maybe approached things too logically, so much so that it lost character. I don't know, I just think this has been a good thing so far. Where I struggle is the nice, smooth oil paints have made the rock a little bit unnatural, which I think I tried to counter by adding some more acrylic colours, which were then too rough. I think what I should have done is a gentle dry brush to achieve the results I was looking for. I'm filling the deep cracks with a dusty weathering pigment. I ended up using weathering pigments in both builds quite frequently because the surface and texture variations for light to bounce off differently add so much to large builds. It 100% saved the day and turned something that looked rushed into something slightly less rushed. Also, that pot of yellow-green from Tamiya is my favourite paint ever. It makes things look so gross, or mossy, or aged in seconds. The trick is, though, when you get it new off the shelf, it's too liquidy to be useful. So you have to take the lid off and let some of the water, I guess it is, some of the solvent evaporate for a few days until it looks much closer to slime. And then it's perfect. I gave the sci-fi build a quick spray of silver spray paint and painted on some green detail. I was far too careful to begin with. I should have slapped the paint on and cleaned it up. It would have saved a lot more time. I also wanted to do oil washes, but then I realized I had no time to apply a clear coat first, so I risked it and tried without. With oil paints, you apply a clear coat to act as a barrier between acrylic paints and the oils. Without it, depending on the base material and the brand of paint or even color, the color can lift straight off, and in this case, it did. On the fantasy build, I spent a long time painting on sigils and runes that eventually I covered up because the piece looked like a big turd with too many perfect looking sigils on it. On the left, I went with a dark wash and sort of did a flicky, splashy effect in hope that it would look like random corrosion. And then I made everything dirty with pigment powders and a sand with pigment powders in it as well. To finish off the fantasy build, I did one big ruin on the front and then added some flowers. And then I decided to retire before I messed it up with any rash last-minute decisions, which in retrospect was slightly cowardly. Finishing off this sci-fi build, I hit it with a clear coat to seal in all the pigment and give it a nice uniform finish, and then I applied some more pigments on top to make some areas dusty, and somehow, I think while spray painting and trying to put on a mask, I got some pigment on my nose, so please ignore that. And then that's it! Here are my results. I can see where these pieces might go with a bit more time or more iterations, even just another color or two, but regardless, it's also cool to go from not having a thing to having a thing in an hour, and my hopes are if I get good at making things fast, it means eventually I can make good things fast, which seems like a fantastic asset to have. So I'll do this again, and next episode I'll set it up so patrons can vote on a theme or materials or something fun like that. Okay, bye for now.
Hi there, you've reached Scott's phone. I'm unavailable right now, so please leave a message after the little beep. Unless you're Trent, then honestly, dude, you need to stop calling. Please.